Hi, my name is Guy Wallace, and I've been thinking a little bit about cognitive task analysis, or what I've called thought flow analysis, borrowing that term from Deb Stone and Steve Villachica from an article that they did back in the late 80s. But I did this video recently with Dr. Richard E. Clark, Dick Clark, professor emeritus from Southern California University, to discuss cognitive task analysis and what was going on with he and others who were doing a project on artificial intelligence enabling cognitive task analysis. That caused me to do some reflection about my previous process and the book that I wrote about this. Now, I believe that L&D analysts, designers, and developers need to determine, design, develop, and deploy instruction, either job aids or training, or what's otherwise known today as performance support and learning, that covers how performers need to think about their work before, during, and after they do the tasks that they do. Now, the doing tasks, the behavioral tasks, are the overt tasks, those that can be observed, they can be counted, they can be measured. But the thinking tasks, the cognitive tasks, are covert tasks that cannot be observed, counted, or measured. So research shows that cognitive tasks are mostly automated, they're non-conscious, and therefore experts, master performers, and other subject matter experts cannot easily recall them, and so L&D professionals cannot easily elicit them. So how to think about the work that's being done is often not included in instruction. And that forces people from going from formal instruction, formal learning, to various means of informal learning, trial and error, and social learning, where you ask your neighbor, who also is going to be suffering from cognitive task issues, in that what they think about as they do their work is non-conscious to them. They cannot elicit them. And the research shows that about 70% of what an expert knows cannot be elicited. They cannot tell you how to think about the work that they do. So that's been pretty consistent across all of the research. The good news is that multiple experts have automated a different 70% than the rest of their peers. And so, therefore, by using a multitude of sources, a multitude of master performers and other subject matter experts, one can elicit more and more of the thinking that needs to augment the doing tasks. Now, approaches like thinking aloud aren't going to solve that issue, because if you ask me to think aloud, I'm going to give you the 30% that I can recall easily, and the rest, the 70% that I cannot recall, I cannot think aloud and give that to you. So that's kind of a faulty approach. Since 1979, I've been conducting analysis, design, and sometimes development using a facilitated group process. We wrote articles about this back in 1984 in the NSPI Journal, that's now the ISPI Journal, and in Training Magazine. So we've been doing this for a long time. And what I learned in doing the analysis and design work that way is that the experts, the master performers, not people who just know about the work, the performance that we're trying to train others to be able to do, but they were masters at the performance. So we anchored our analysis and design and development to the performance of tasks. It used to frustrate me when those experts would say after an analysis team meeting that that was the best training they ever had. It took me a number of years to realize that they were learning from each other more than they had ever learned from any formal training before, because they were learning the tips and the tricks from their peers, other master performers, and other subject matter experts who might have deep expertise in the requirements from the regulatory bodies that might govern the performance that we were focused on. So let me start with some slides here. Enterprise L&D is really all about performance, or really should be, at least most of the time, the majority of the time. And people are on the payroll not to know things, not to even perform tasks, because those two things, knowing things and the ability to perform tasks or to have certain competencies, certain mastery of certain behaviors, is really just a means to the ends of producing outputs of value, outputs that meet stakeholder requirements, which then gives you desired outcomes. Generally, I do behavior analysis during my analysis phase, and then I defer the cognitive or thought flow analysis until I get to the development phase. There's reasons for that. A lot of times in the design effort, when the clients review the design, they may toss out certain sections that they don't feel are worthy of the effort. And therefore, if I'd gone deep in doing both cognitive task analysis on top of the behavioral task analysis, that would have been a wasted effort. And those kinds of approaches generally lead to what's known as analysis paralysis. So maybe you call it discovery instead of analysis because of the taint of those past practices where a whole lot of time and effort went into something that was probably not even used in the design and the development of the instruction. So, because performers need to think about their performance before, during, and after they do the tasks, it's important that we capture that and we understand what do you need to think about before you do the task, as you're doing the task, and afterwards. So, for example, for me, I have to ask the performers, the master performers, other subject matter experts, does the situation, the performance context, and everybody and everything in it call for something other than what the quality movement practitioners might call standard work? Do I do this in a standard manner, or do I need to vary it in some way? And then the who, what, when, where, how, and why should I do it needs to be conveyed. There's another way to do this given the situational context, the situational variables that might exist in the performance context. During the work, we need to understand, should I continue as planned in the middle of me doing something, or do I need to change what I'm doing based on what I am seeing or sensing or expecting based on cues and clues in the performance context? And then after I've finished a task or a task set on my way to producing an output, is it appropriate for me to go right on to the next task, or do I need to do some further inspection of what I've done or what I'm planning to do next? Do I need to do any rework before moving on? Do I need to change the process going forward from here on out based on what I discovered? It's important when you're looking at performance to understand that we're all about the outputs that are being produced by the tasks, by the environment. People manipulate their environment, use incoming materials, use equipment, et cetera, in order to produce outputs, which are really inputs downstream. This graphic shows that. So when we're thinking about thought flow or cognitive tasks in the workflow, we need to think about they are all leading to some output, which again is an input downstream. The application exercises, otherwise known as practice and feedback that we might produce in our instruction, in our learning, needs to be authentic. It needs to reflect the real world tasks and conditions that the learner, who is really a performer, should expect to find in their performance context. The demonstrations that we give them before we have them do the application exercises should also be authentic and may focus only on the standard work, the way to do this, and perhaps some variances on that where you might have to do non-standard work. And we can demonstrate that before we put them through application exercises. And then the information that we give them needs to prepare them to see and understand the demonstration, which should look pretty much like the application exercises that would follow. Again, in my approach to instructional analysis, design, and development, this is my model for that. I break it down into phases. And where I generally do the behavioral task analysis, again, is in the analysis phase. What is it that we can observe? And while doing that, I might capture some of the thinking that's necessary, and then I'll document that as well. But I'm not intending to go deep on the thinking that has to happen before, during, and after the doing. I save that to when I get into my development and acquisition phase, where I'm going to actually develop the materials based on the design, which is based on the analysis data, which is based on the project plan that articulated the scope and the extent of which what we were trying to achieve, and included information about who is the target audience. Now, my book, ThoughtFlow Analysis, which I published in 2021, came after my book on conducting performance-based instructional analysis in every phase of the instructional development process, or whatever you call that approach to creating worthy learning. My book after those two was about performance-based lesson mapping, how to take the analysis data and map it into a series of lessons, collection of lessons, or one singular lesson, depending on what the scope is of your project. And that also relates to the structured social learning, when we need to approach learning on more of a one-to-one or one-to-a-small group basis, because we don't have large audiences, or we might have had a large audience to start with, but after that, then it might be just down to a trickle. This is all covered in my 3Ds of ThoughtFlow analysis, where we focus on the discriminations that the learner, the performers, need to make in the performance context, the determination of their options as they see that, and the decisions as to which option they'll go with and what might trigger them to switch horses in the middle of the stream, so to speak, and follow up and finish off their performance, responding to the situational cues and clues that they might uncover. I hope that this has been helpful.